I learned about property easements the hard way, buried in a document nobody thought I'd actually read, and it cost the HOA president her mind when I used it against her. My name is Lancaster, and I live in Whitefish, Montana, where winter comes hard and stays long. I bought my property 3 years ago, a beautiful 10 acres on the edge of the Willow Creek subdivision, complete with a small cabin I'd been renovating and enough land to enjoy my hobbies. One of those hobbies happened to be snow machining, something I'd done since I was a kid growing up in Minnesota. The rumble of a good snowmobile cutting through fresh powder was better than therapy, and Montana offered everything I needed for it. The problem started in December when Brenda Miller, the HOA president, showed up at my door with a clipboard and a smile that could freeze antifreeze. She was 52, wore a parka that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage, and had that particular haircut that screamed she wanted to speak to managers across 3 states. "Mr. Lancaster," she said, not waiting for an invitation before launching in. "I've received multiple complaints about the noise from your snowmobile. It's disturbing the peace of our community." I stood in the doorway, still holding my coffee. The peace of the community. Brenda, my nearest neighbor, is half a mile away and I only ride during daylight hours. What complaints? She tapped her clipboard like it held the secrets of the universe. "That's confidential, but I'm here to inform you that as of today, you're in violation of the HOA covenant regarding excessive noise. The fine is $500, payable within 30 days. $500. For riding a snowmobile on my own property. The covenants are very clear," she said, pulling out a document. Section 12, subsection 4. No homeowner shall create or permit excessive noise that disrupts the peaceful enjoyment of the community. I took the paper from her. "I'll look into this. But Brenda, I'm not paying a fine for using my property legally." Her smile got tighter. "The fine increases by $200 each week it remains unpaid. I suggest you take this seriously, Mr. Lancaster." She left, and I stood there watching her SUV disappear down my driveway. The thing was, I knew the HOA covenants. I'd read them before buying the property, specifically because I wanted to make sure there were no restrictions on recreational vehicles. The noise clause was vague at best, and my lawyer had assured me it wouldn't be an issue given my property's location. That night, I dug out every document from my purchase. The deed, the title, the survey, and most importantly, the easement agreements. That's when I found it, buried on page 47 of the subdivision plat maps. A private easement running through my property, granted to the original developer, giving access to Pine Ridge Road from the main cluster of HOA homes. Here's the thing about Whitefish winters. They're brutal. The main highway into town gets plowed regularly, but Pine Ridge Road, which connected to the cluster of 12 expensive homes where Brenda and her cronies lived, was a county road that got lower priority. The homeowners in that section had been using an alternate route for years, a private gravel road that cut through what was now my property, connecting them directly to Highway 93. It shaved 15 miles off their drive and kept them from getting snowed in. The easement had been granted by the developer to the homeowners association, valid for 30 years from 1998. I did the math. It expired in 2028, but more interestingly, there was a clause I'd missed before. The easement could be terminated early by the property owner if the HOA violated the terms of the agreement, which included acting in good faith and maintaining positive relations with the property owner. I smiled for the first time since Brenda's visit. The next day, I called my lawyer, Tom Henderson. He'd handled my property purchase and knew the area well. "Tom, I need you to look at something," I said, scanning the easement document to him. He called back an hour later. Lucas, this is interesting. You're right about the termination clause. If you can prove the HOA acted in bad faith against you, you could revoke the easement. But that's going to be a fight. They just fined me $500 for riding my snowmobile during the day on my own property with no reasonable basis. Does that count? Tom was quiet for a moment. It could. The good faith clause is pretty broad, but you'd need to document everything. And Lucas, if you revoke this easement, you're going to make enemies. That road is their only practical winter access. They made me the enemy first, I said. Can you draft a response to the fine? I'll have something by tomorrow. While Tom worked on the legal response, I did my homework. I drove the route the HOA members used, timing it from Brenda's house to the highway. Using my property's easement road, it took 12 minutes. Using the official county route through Pine Ridge Road, it took 45 minutes when the snow was bad. And according to the county records, Pine Ridge had been impassable for days at a time the previous 3 winters. I also checked the noise ordinances. Montana law was pretty clear. Recreational vehicles could be operated on private property during daylight hours unless they exceeded certain decibel levels. I called a friend who did environmental consulting and borrowed his sound meter. The next Saturday, I took my snowmobile out and he measured from the property line. 78 decibels at my nearest boundary. The county limit was 90. I was golden. Tom sent his response to Brenda on Wednesday. It was polite but firm, citing the actual noise ordinances and demanding the HOA provide evidence of any violation. He copied the entire HOA board, which included 5 other people from the subdivision. Brenda's response came by certified mail 2 days later. The fine was now $700 for late payment, and she'd added another $500 for continued violations and hostile behavior toward HOA representatives. That was when I made my decision. Tom, draft the easement termination, I said. Make it effective February 1st. Lucas, are you sure? There might be other ways to handle this. I'm sure. They want to play games with made-up fines they can drive the long way around. The termination notice went out on January 15th. I sent it certified mail to every member of the HOA board and posted it on the community bulletin board as required by the subdivision rules. The response was immediate and nuclear. My phone started ringing that evening. The first call was from Dennis Hartley, one of the board members. Lucas, this is insane, he said. You can't just shut down the road. Do you know what that'll do to us? I can, actually. The easement has a termination clause and the HOA violated it. You want to blame someone, blame Brenda. Over a noise complaint, this is completely disproportionate. No, Dennis, this is about property rights. Brenda decided to abuse her position to harass me with bogus fines. The easement agreement requires good faith. She didn't act in good faith. We'll fight this, he said. We'll get a lawyer. You should. Tom Henderson is mine. He's very good. The next call was from Susan Martinez, another board member. She tried a different approach. Lucas, I'm sorry about how Brenda handled this. We didn't all agree with the fine. Can we work something out? Sure, I said. Drop all fines, issue a formal apology, and vote Brenda out as president. Then we can talk about the easement. That's not realistic. Brenda has a lot of support on the board. Then February 1st, you're taking the long route. The third call was Brenda herself, and she was furious. You spiteful little man, she hissed. Do you have any idea what you're doing? People depend on that road. We have elderly residents, families with children. You're putting them at risk. Funny. I don't remember you worrying about good faith and community relations when you were inventing fines, I said. The easement expires February 1st. You've got 2 weeks to sort out alternative arrangements. I will bury you in legal fees. We'll sue you into the ground. Try it. My lawyers already reviewed everything. The easement is crystal clear and you violated the terms. But hey, I'm sure a judge will be sympathetic when you explain how you needed to keep using my private property while simultaneously harassing me. She hung up, and I poured myself a whiskey. The next week was chaos. The HOA held an emergency meeting which I attended as a property owner. The community center was packed, and the energy was hostile. Brenda stood at the front, pointing at a map. "Mr. Lancaster is attempting to hold us hostage," she announced. "He's threatening to cut off essential access to 12 homes because he doesn't want to pay a legitimate fine for disturbing the peace." I raised my hand. "That's not accurate and you know it." "You're not recognized to speak," Brenda snapped. "This is a homeowners meeting. I'm a homeowner." Section 3 of the HOA bylaws says any homeowner can speak during open forum. One of the other board members, a quiet guy named Paul, nodded. "He's right, Brenda. Let him talk." I stood up. "First, the fine wasn't legitimate. I've had my snowmobile noise measured by a certified professional, and it's well below county limits. I've only ridden during daylight hours on my own property." Brenda issued the fine without any evidence of an actual violation. Second, the easement agreement requires the HOA to act in good faith toward the property owner. Harassing me with bogus fines doesn't qualify. And third, this isn't about holding anyone hostage. This is about enforcing my property rights after the HOA president decided to abuse her position. A woman in the back raised her hand. "Can't you just pay the fine and move on? You're hurting the whole community over this." "Would you pay a fine for something you didn't do wrong?" I asked. "Would you let someone abuse their authority and set a precedent that they can charge you whatever they want, whenever they want, with no evidence? Because that's what this is about." Dennis stood up. "The board is prepared to offer a compromise. We'll reduce the fine to $200 and in exchange you maintain the easement." "No," I said. "Drop the fine entirely, acknowledge there was no violation, and issue a formal apology. Then we talk." "That's completely unreasonable," Brenda said. "So is a $1,200 fine for legally using my own property," I shot back. The meeting devolved into shouting after that. Half the room was angry at me, half was angry at Brenda, and nobody was happy. I left before it got worse. February 1st came with 2 feet of fresh snow. I'd spent the previous week putting up fencing along the easement road, including a locked gate at the entrance. The fence was legal, properly positioned on my property line, and the gate had a very visible private property, no trespassing sign. The first violation happened at 6 in the morning. I'd set up a trail camera, and it caught Dennis Hartley's truck pulling up to the gate, cutting the lock with bolt cutters and driving through. I called the sheriff's office. Deputy Rebecca King showed up around noon. She was professional but clearly unhappy to be there. "Mr. Lancaster, I understand you've had a trespassing incident." "4 incidents this morning," I said, showing her the trail camera footage. "Dennis Hartley, Susan Martinez, Brenda Miller, and someone in a white Lexus I haven't identified yet." She watched the footage and sighed. "This is a civil property dispute. Are you sure you want to press charges?" "I revoked a legal easement after giving proper notice. They cut my lock and trespassed. Yes, I want to press charges." "This is going to make your life difficult," she warned. "It's already difficult. At least this way it's legal." She took my statement and the camera footage. I gave her copies of the easement termination notice and proof of delivery to show that everyone knew the road was closed. The charges were filed that afternoon: trespassing and criminal mischief for the destroyed lock. All four of them received citations. That's when things escalated beyond what I expected. The next morning, I woke up to find my driveway blocked by two trucks parked sideways across the entrance. Brenda and Dennis were standing there with about 6 other HOA members, all wearing matching Willow Creek community jackets like some kind of suburban militia. I walked out in my boots and bathrobe. "Morning. You're on my property. We're not leaving until you restore the easement," Brenda announced. "You want to play games, we can play games. You're trespassing again. Leave now or I'm calling the sheriff. Call them. We'll tell them you're holding our community hostage over a petty dispute." I pulled out my phone and dialed. Deputy King answered on the third ring. "Rebecca, Lucas Lancaster. I've got about 8 HOA members blocking my driveway and refusing to leave." She arrived 20 minutes later with backup. The standoff had attracted a local news crew by then, a reporter from the Whitefish Pilot who'd gotten wind of the drama. "Folks, you need to clear the driveway," Deputy King said. "We're staging a peaceful protest," Brenda insisted. "This man is endangering our community. You're trespassing on private property. Move the vehicles now, or you'll be arrested." Nobody moved. I almost felt bad for Rebecca as she called for more backup. By noon, 3 more deputies had arrived, and one by one, they arrested the protesters for criminal trespassing. Brenda was the last to go, shouting about lawsuits and police harassment the whole way. The reporter caught me as the last patrol car pulled away. Her name was Jennifer Cole, and she had sharp eyes. "Mr. Lancaster, can you explain what's happening here?" I gave her the condensed version: the bogus fines, the easement termination, the retaliation. She took notes and asked good questions. "You think you'll restore the easement?" "Not unless the HOA drops all fines, acknowledges they acted improperly, and makes changes to prevent this kind of abuse in the future. This isn't about inconveniencing people. It's about property rights and accountability." The story ran the next day. "Local HOA dispute turns into property rights battle" was the headline, and Jennifer had done her homework. She'd pulled the noise ordinance data, interviewed Tom about easement law, and even gotten quotes from some subdivision residents who were frustrated with Brenda's leadership. The public response was mixed. Some people thought I was being petty and vindictive. Others, especially those who'd had their own HOA horror stories, saw me as fighting the good fight. The story got picked up by a few regional news outlets, and suddenly, my quiet property dispute was getting attention. The HOA's response was to file a lawsuit seeking to compel me to restore the easement. They argued that cutting off access created an undue hardship and that the termination was retaliatory and improper. Tom had been expecting this. "They're going to lose," he said when we met to review the complaint. "The easement language is clear, and you gave proper notice. But it'll take time to get through court, probably 6 months minimum. So they're stuck with Pine Ridge Road all winter and spring, unless they negotiate, which they should, but Brenda seems determined to fight." He was right. The lawsuit ground forward through February and into March. The HOA members, particularly those in the affected section, were furious. Some of them were stuck at home for days during heavy snowfalls because Pine Ridge Road was impassable. Emergency services could get through eventually, but it was a genuine hardship. I felt bad for the residents who weren't involved in the harassment. A retired couple, George and Martha Williams, lived in one of the homes that relied on the easement road. Martha had health issues, and the road closure was making their lives genuinely difficult. George called me in early March. "Lucas, I'm not calling to yell at you," he said. "I just want to understand, is there any way to work this out, George? I've offered from the start. Drop the fines, acknowledge the HOA overstepped, and make reforms so this doesn't happen again. Brenda won't budge. She's stubborn. Always has been. But you're hurting people who had nothing to do with this. I know, and I'm sorry about that, but what's the alternative? I let them keep using my property while they fine me for made-up violations. Where does it end? He didn't have an answer for that. The breaking point came in early April. The snow was melting, but Pine Ridge Road had suffered significant damage from the winter freeze-thaw cycles. The county had it on their repair schedule, but it wouldn't be fixed until June at the earliest. The road was barely passable even in a four-wheel drive. That's when Brenda made her biggest mistake. One of the HOA members, a guy named Travis Benton, decided to take matters into his own hands. He brought a bulldozer onto my property at night and started clearing a new path around my fence, tearing up vegetation and damaging the land. He figured if he created a new route, the easement issue would be moot. I woke up to the sound of machinery at 3 in the morning. By the time I got dressed and outside, he'd carved a 100-foot scar across my land. I called the sheriff immediately, and this time they took it seriously. Travis was arrested for criminal trespass, criminal mischief, and property damage. The bulldozer was impounded. But the damage was done, literally. My property had a gash across it that would take professional restoration to fix. Tom filed an expanded lawsuit the next day, adding claims for property damage, emotional distress, and a request for an injunction barring any HOA member from entering my property for any reason. We also named Brenda personally, arguing that her leadership had created a hostile environment that led to the vandalism. That's when the HOA members started turning on each other. Susan Martinez resigned from the board first, issuing a statement that she couldn't support Brenda's handling of the situation anymore. Paul followed 2 days later. Dennis held on longer, but after the bulldozer incident, even he admitted things had gone too far. An emergency HOA meeting was called in mid-April to vote on Brenda's removal as president. I didn't attend, but Tom did on my behalf. According to him, it was brutal. Brenda fought to keep her position, arguing that she'd been defending the community's interests, but the residents had had enough. The vote was 32-8 to remove her. The new interim president was a level-headed engineer named Robert Chen. He called me the next day. "Mr. Lancaster, I'd like to meet and discuss a resolution. No lawyers, no hostility, just two people trying to fix a mess." We met at a coffee shop in downtown Whitefish. Robert was in his 40s, calm and practical. "I've reviewed everything," he said. "Brenda was out of line with the fine. You were within your rights to revoke the easement, and the vandalism was inexcusable. On behalf of the HOA, I apologize." "I appreciate that," I said, "but an apology doesn't fix the damage to my property." "I know. Travis Benton is facing criminal charges, and his homeowner's insurance is covering the restoration costs. We've already contacted the company. As for the fines, the board voted last night to rescind them entirely and to issue a formal letter acknowledging you were never in violation of any covenant." I sipped my coffee. "What about reforms? How do I know this doesn't happen again to me or someone else?" "We're rewriting the enforcement procedures. Moving forward, any fine over $200 requires a board vote, and homeowners get a formal hearing before any penalty is assessed. We're also adding an independent arbitration process for disputes." That's a start. "Will you restore the easement?" I'd been thinking about this for weeks. The truth was, I didn't enjoy making life difficult for people like George and Martha, but I also wasn't going to be pushed around. "Here's my offer," I said. "I'll restore the easement for 1 year, renewable annually. Each year, The HOA needs to confirm in writing that they're maintaining good faith and following the new enforcement procedures. If there's another issue like this, the easement ends immediately with 30 days' notice. And the HOA pays for annual maintenance on the road, including grading and snow removal. Robert considered this. That's fair. I'll need to bring it to the board, but I think we can agree to those terms. The board voted 3 days later. The agreement passed unanimously, with Brenda abstaining. Tom drew up a new easement agreement with the revised terms, and we signed it in early May. The restoration on my property took 6 weeks. Travis Benton's insurance paid for professional landscaping to repair the bulldozer damage, and they actually did a nice job. The scar was gone by July, replaced with native grasses and wildflowers. As for the legal cases, Travis pled guilty to the criminal charges and received probation, a fine, and community service. The civil suit against him and Brenda was settled out of court. Travis's insurance paid for the restoration, and Brenda agreed to cover my legal fees and issue a formal written apology. She never apologized in person, but seeing her signature on that letter was satisfaction enough. The criminal trespass charges against Brenda and the others from the driveway protest were eventually reduced to misdemeanors with small fines after they completed a restorative justice program. Deputy King told me later that the whole situation had been the talk of the sheriff's office for months. Life in Willow Creek settled down after that. The new HOA board, under Robert's leadership, was reasonable and professional. They followed the new enforcement procedures, and disputes were handled through the arbitration process. I even served on a committee to review the covenant language and make it clearer. Brenda moved away in September. Rumor had it she'd gotten divorced and relocated to Bozeman to be closer to her daughter. I never saw her again. As for me, I kept riding my snowmobile. The sound of it cutting through fresh powder was still the best therapy I knew. And every time I passed the easement road on my property, I smiled, knowing that respect and property rights had won out over petty tyranny. George and Martha invited me over for dinner that fall. We sat on their deck overlooking the mountains, and George raised his glass. "To standing up for what's right, even when it's hard," he said. "To good neighbors," I replied. We drank, and for the first time in a year I felt like the community was actually living up to its name. The following winter came with even more snow than the previous year. By mid-December, Whitefish was buried under 3 feet of powder, and the temperatures dropped below zero for days at a time. The easement road through my property was regularly maintained now, just as the agreement specified. The HOA had hired a local contractor who plowed it every morning after heavy snowfall, and they'd even improved the grading so water drained properly in the spring. I developed an unexpected friendship with Robert Chen. He'd stop by occasionally, and we'd talk about property management, local politics, and sometimes just life. He was good people, the kind of leader the HOA should have had from the start. "You know, you changed this place," he told me one afternoon while we were clearing ice from my front steps. "People actually read the covenants now. They ask questions. The board can't just do whatever they want anymore." "That's how it should have been all along," I said. "True. But sometimes it takes someone willing to fight to make that happen." In February, I got a letter from a law firm in Kalispell. My stomach dropped when I saw it, worried that Brenda was stirring up trouble again. But when I opened it, I found something completely different. It was from an attorney representing the Williams family. George had passed away in January from a heart attack, and Martha wanted me to know. The letter included an invitation to a small memorial service and a personal note from Martha. "Lucas, George always respected what you did." He said you reminded him of himself when he was younger, before the world wore him down. He'd want you to know that he was grateful for neighbors who stood up for what's right. Thank you for fighting that fight, and thank you for finding a way to restore the road. It meant more than you know. I attended the service. It was small, just family and close friends, but Martha made a point of introducing me to her children and grandchildren. "This is the young man I told you about," she said. "The one who stood up to the HOA." Her son, a lawyer from Seattle, shook my hand firmly. "Mom says you went through hell with Brenda Miller." "It was worth it," I said. "Your dad was good people." After George's death, Martha decided to sell the house and move to Missoula to be closer to her son. I helped her with some of the estate sale logistics, carrying furniture and making runs to donation centers. It felt good to help, and it reminded me why I'd moved to Montana in the first place. Community meant something here, when you found the right people. The house sold in March to a young couple from California, Mark and Rachel Kingston. They were in their 30s, working remotely in tech and looking for a quieter life. I met them when they came to view the property, and Mark asked about the easement road. "I heard there was some drama about this road," he said. "Is that going to be an issue?" "Not anymore," I said. "The HOA learned their lesson. As long as they follow the agreement, everyone's happy." Rachel looked concerned. "What kind of agreement?" I explained the situation, keeping it brief. Their eyes widened as I described the fines, the easement termination, and the bulldozer incident. "That's insane," Rachel said. "Do HOAs really do that kind of thing?" "Bad ones do," I said. "But the leadership's changed. Robert Chen's president now, and he's reasonable. Just make sure you read the covenants carefully and know your rights." They took the advice to heart. When they moved in, Mark actually came to me with questions about the subdivision rules. I walked him through the important sections and introduced him to Robert. It was nice to see new blood in the community that wasn't going to be pushed around. By spring, life had found a comfortable rhythm. I'd finished most of the cabin renovations, turning it into a proper year-round home. I'd also started a small side business doing property surveys and easement consultations for other homeowners in the area. Turns out, my experience with the HOA had given me expertise people were willing to pay for. Tom Henderson referred several clients to me, people dealing with their own property disputes. None were quite as dramatic as mine, but each one reinforced something I'd learned. Most HOA problems came down to poor communication, vague rules, and leaders who let power go to their heads. I helped a guy in Columbia Falls who was being fined for parking his work truck in his driveway. The HOA covenant said, "No commercial vehicles," but it didn't define what that meant. We argued that a pickup truck with a company logo wasn't materially different from any other pickup, and the HOA backed down after we threatened legal action. Another case involved a woman in Big Fork, whose HOA was trying to force her to remove solar panels. The covenant said nothing about solar installations because they'd been written in the 80s, before solar was common. We successfully argued that the HOA couldn't retroactively ban something the covenants didn't address. She kept her panels. Each case was satisfying in its own way, but none gave me the same feeling as driving past that easement road on my property and knowing I'd fought for it and won. In June, the Willow Creek HOA held its annual meeting. Robert had asked me to attend and say a few words about property rights and community relations. I was hesitant at first, but Tom encouraged me. "You've got credibility now," he said. "People know you're not some hothead. You fought for principle, and you were willing to compromise when the HOA acted reasonably. That's a powerful message." So I went. The meeting was held at the community center, and about 50 homeowners showed up. Robert introduced me, giving a brief overview of the previous year's dispute and how it had led to reforms. Lucas Lancaster could have stayed angry, Robert said. He could have refused to restore the easement out of spite. But instead, he worked with us to find a solution that protected everyone's rights. I've asked him to share some thoughts about what he learned. I stood up, feeling suddenly nervous. Public speaking wasn't my strong suit. But I looked around the room and saw familiar faces, people I'd shared a community with through conflict and resolution. I moved to Montana for space and freedom, I began. I bought property in this subdivision because I thought it offered both. When the HOA started fining me for legally using my own land, it felt like a betrayal, not just of me, but of the whole idea of property ownership. I paused, gathering my thoughts. Here's what I learned. HOAs serve an important purpose. They maintain common areas, set reasonable standards, and help preserve property values. But they only work when there's accountability and respect. When leaders abuse their power, when rules are enforced arbitrarily, the whole system breaks down. A few people nodded. I continued. I didn't terminate the easement to punish anyone. I did it because it was the only leverage I had to demand fair treatment. And I restored it because the new board showed they were willing to listen and reform. That's how communities should work. Not through power plays and retaliation, but through mutual respect and good faith. I sat down to scattered applause. It wasn't a standing ovation, but several people came up afterward to shake my hand and thank me. A woman named Patricia said her own HOA in California had fined her out of her home, and she was glad to see someone fight back successfully. "You gave people hope," she said. "That matters." The summer passed peacefully. I spent my days hiking, fishing, and enjoying the Montana wilderness I'd moved here for. I kept riding my snowmobile when the early snows came in October, and nobody complained. The sound that had started the whole mess was just background noise now, part of life in the mountains. In November, Robert called with unexpected news. "The county's recognizing you at their Community Leadership Awards," he said. "They want to give you something for improving HOA accountability in the region." "That's ridiculous," I said. "I was just protecting my property." "You did more than that. Since your case, 3 other HOAs in Flathead County have reformed their enforcement procedures. You started something bigger than you realize." The awards ceremony was at the county courthouse in December. It was surreal, standing on a stage while a county commissioner talked about my courageous stand for property rights. They gave me a plaque and a handshake, and local news covered it. Jennifer Cole, the reporter who'd covered the original story, did a follow-up piece. "Local man's HOA fight sparks regional reform," ran in the Whitefish Pilot and got picked up by the Missourian and even the Billings Gazette. I did a few interviews, always emphasizing the same points. Know your rights, read your documents, and don't let anyone abuse their authority. The attention was uncomfortable but worthwhile. I got emails from people across Montana and neighboring states, sharing their own HOA horror stories and asking for advice. I couldn't help everyone, but I tried to point them in the right direction, usually toward lawyers who specialized in property law. Through it all, the easement road remained open. The HOA paid for maintenance like clockwork, and Robert sent me an annual letter confirming their good faith compliance. It became routine, almost boring, which was exactly how it should have been from the start. 2 years after the original dispute, I was clearing snow from my driveway when a car pulled up. A woman in her 30s stepped out, looking nervous. "Are you Lucas Lancaster?" "That's me." "I'm Deborah, Brenda Miller's daughter. Can we talk?" I leaned on my shovel, curious. "Sure." She pulled her coat tighter against the cold. "My mom asked me to come. She's too proud to do it herself, but she wanted you to know she's sorry for all of it." I didn't know what to say. Deborah continued, "She's been in therapy since the divorce, working through a lot of stuff. She realizes now that she used the HOA to feel powerful and in control because her personal life was falling apart. That doesn't excuse what she did, but she wanted you to understand." "Why didn't she come herself?" Like I said, pride. "And honestly, I think she's ashamed. She knows she hurt people and nearly destroyed the community over her own issues." I thought about it. Part of me was still angry at Brenda for the stress and expense she'd caused, but another part recognized that holding onto that anger wasn't helping anyone. "Tell her I appreciate the apology," I said, "and I hope she's doing better." Deborah smiled with relief. "Thank you. That means a lot." She left and I went back to shoveling. The conversation sat with me for days. I realized that the whole ordeal had changed me too. I was less naive about how institutions and power worked, but also more confident in my ability to fight when necessary. It was a hard lesson, but a valuable one. The third anniversary of the easement restoration came and went without fanfare. Life in Willow Creek had normalized completely. The HOA functioned smoothly under Robert's leadership. Disputes were rare and handled fairly, and the community actually felt like a community. I still rode my snowmobile every winter, the sound echoing across the mountains. But now when I passed the easement road, I didn't think about conflict or leverage. I thought about the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult. I thought about the value of compromise when your opponent shows good faith. And I thought about how a small property dispute in Montana had taught me more about justice, community, and principle than I'd ever expected. One evening in late March, I sat on my porch watching the sun set over the mountains. The snow was melting, revealing the brown earth beneath. The easement road cut through my property like a scar, but it was a scar I'd made peace with. It represented both the fight and the resolution, the conflict and the compromise. My phone rang. It was Tom Henderson. "Lucas, I've got a potential client who's dealing with an HOA nightmare in Missoula. Woman named Sandra being fined for having chickens in her backyard. She's heard about your case and wants to know if you'd consult." I smiled. "Send me her information, I'll give her a call." "You've become the go-to guy for HOA disputes," Tom said with a laugh. "Never thought that'd be your legacy." Neither did I. But if I can help people avoid what I went through, it's worth it. After we hung up, I stayed on the porch as darkness fell. The stars came out, brilliant and clear in the mountain sky. Somewhere in the subdivision, lights were coming on in homes, families settling in for the evening. The easement road was quiet now, but come morning, someone would use it to get to work or school or wherever they needed to go. And that was fine. Because it was a road built on respect, maintained through accountability, and opened through the hard work of standing up for what's right. That was a legacy I could live with. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of pine and melting snow. Spring was coming, bringing with it new growth and new possibilities. I went inside, closing the door on another Montana winter and the battles it had brought. But I knew that if I ever needed to fight again, I had the knowledge and the courage to do it. Because sometimes, defending your property rights isn't just about the land. It's about defending the principle that no one, not even an HOA president with a clipboard and a superiority complex, gets to abuse their power without consequences. It's about proving that ordinary people can stand up to institutional overreach and win, as long as they know their rights and refuse to back down. I learned that lesson in the most expensive, stressful, and ultimately rewarding way possible. And I wouldn't change it for anything, because it taught me who I was and what I stood for. In the end, that knowledge was worth more than any easement, any fine, or any conflict. It was worth everything.